The groom told me to leave my own child's wedding. The man I once loved more than myself stood before me today, cold as a block of ice. I didn't argue, I just pressed another freeze button inside myself. At the same time, invoices and canceled emails dropped into the inbox like pebbles into water. I stepped out into the lobby, letting the bare truth walk into the hall on its own. That night, Buddy, the old dog, still lay with his head pillowed on my legs. Beside me was the ring-bound notebook already open. On the old page, a harsh line appeared. Do you dare stay to the very end? The kitchen glows dimly, like a well of light set in the middle of the house, pouring over the wooden table a pale gold just enough to see the scratches running along the grain. The coffee is still steaming, thin and patient like mist. He lifts the cup with both hands, the porcelain rim chipped in a small spot where the glaze has dried, and sets it down very slowly, the base of the cup fitting snugly into the old brown ring stamped on the tabletop. The touch is so light it's almost soundless. Only the feeling of exact fit spreads to his fingertips. Under his knee, Buddy rests his chin on the thick fabric of his pants, his breath steady and warm. The fur at the nape of the dog's neck moves very slightly with each heartbeat, like a small needle measuring peace. On the shelf, the glass sugar jar glows faintly. A long spoon leans against its side, leaving a dry streak. The refrigerator hums softly, the motors sound like a straight line driven deep into the morning. The window curtain sometimes shivers with the draft from the porch slipping through the crack, bringing the smell of old wood and a trace of the night's damp. He sits upright, unhurried. His left hand rests on Buddy's head, the palm cupped lightly, a habit the two of them have taught each other over the years, like how one keeps a page still against the wind. The phone lies face down on the kitchen counter here, the charger loosely plugged in, the cord curled into a slack loop. He doesn't turn it over. In the corner, a thin coat hangs on a nail, the sleeve drooping into a folded shadow that looks like a person standing silently facing the wall. Near the door, there's a strange scratch on the wooden floor, so small you wouldn't see it. Unless you bent down, the grain cracked in the shape of a fishhook, as if someone had dragged something hard across it and stopped halfway. He looks at the scratch, doesn't touch it, lets his gaze rest for a beat, then returns to his coffee. The heat touches his lips, the bitterness opening in the familiar spot on the tip of his tongue. He doesn't drink much, just enough for the porcelain's warmth to travel into the joints of his fingers. Buddy shifts. A claw taps the floor, a dry little tick like a grain of sand falling. He pats the top of the dog's foot, a slow, calming beat. On the table, a folded napkin lies beside the cup, the paper's edge marked with a faint brown from the last time it was set down. He turns the cup slightly so the new ring covers the old one, a feeling like putting everything back in its proper place. Out on the porch, the light dims and then flares, then dims again like a doorman hesitating before pushing a heavy door. He glances at it, his fingers absent-mindedly feeling his shirt pocket as if checking for a key that isn't there. His other hand straightens the trivet that's askew on the stove, pulling it to the center as if setting back in line a sentence that had been written off the mark. Beside the sink and upturned glass still beads a few drops of water, which run into 3 even dots on the steel surface. The dots stop at the edge, not falling. A corner of paper sticks out from the lower drawer, the cream color of an old binder cover showing by about a finger's width. He doesn't pull the drawer out, he just pushes it gently until it sits flush. The hinge rasps, a little hoarse, then quiets. A small gesture like ending a long sentence, but in truth, only a comma. On the tabletop, a stub of pencil rolls a short arc and stops, its point aimed at the cup. He lays his index finger on the pencil's body to keep it still, feeling the fine dust of wood cling to his skin. The air in the kitchen smells of last night's soap mixed with coffee and the old sun-dried scent of dog fur. He inhales deeply, holds it, then breathes out through his nose, his breathing matching the very slow turn of the ceiling fan above. Buddy lifts his head a little as if taking a signal, his ears peeling off his skull and then settling again. By the chair leg, a thin white ribbon has snagged on the wood from who knows when, its tip curled up like a question mark. He bends to pick it up, rolls it neatly into his palm, and sets it on the edge of the shelf, leaving it there. The porch light flickers again. He stands, his knee joint clicking very softly. The door opens and the draft slides in at once, the cold air and dry leaves mixing with the old paint smell of the door frame. He gives the light's base a gentle twist. The bulb trembles once, the gold deepens, then holds steady. He pauses a few seconds, looking at that steadiness the way one looks at a stitch that has knit closed. Before he pulls the door shut, he runs his eye along the steps. The wood is clean, no leaves, no new footprints, nothing has happened, and yet something has just passed, a kind of silence only someone who has lived here a long time can hear. Back inside, he pulls the chair and sits in the same spot, the coffee cup still within its ring. The steam is still thin, drifting sideways and vanishing. He lays his palm on Buddy's back and feels the firm, strong shoulder blades under the fur, like touching a mooring peg. The dog lets out a breath. His chest rises and falls in one long rhythm. He glances toward the window. The glass is still fogged. If he wrote a word on it, by noon it would be faint. He doesn't write. He lets the mist lift on its own, the glass clear itself. It's nothing but an ordinary morning. A kitchen, a man, an old dog, a coffee cup fitting the old ring. But among those familiar objects, there is something unnamed, like a thin thread wound around a finger, reminding one not to forget. He lifts the cup once more and sets it down in the exact spot, still a perfect fit. And out on the porch, after one last flutter, the light stands steady. The expense ledger lies flat on the table, the paper the color of cream, the crease down the middle etched like the bed of a dried-up river. At the top of the page, a small line of words, deposit, restaurant, flowers, music, is underlined with a fine pencil, the strokes so faint that if you tilt the page even slightly, it sinks into the grain. He draws the coffee cup closer, careful not to let the old brown ring touch the ledger's edge, then leisurely uses a paper clip to gather 3 or 4 receipts into one bundle. The clip bites into the paper with a soft tick, crisp yet gentle, like a note set exactly where it belongs. Numbers appear on each thin slip, a deposit for the restaurant, one for the band, a floral invoice that carries a faded scent of perfume, and a bill for sound equipment rental that wasn't in the original budget line. He rubs his finger lightly over the notes column he keeps at the side, feeling graphite dust cling to his fingertip. Restaurant deposit paid last month. Beneath it, a pale slash beside the word music, as if his hand had stopped midway and changed its mind. He lays the pencil parallel to the ledger's edge and continues arranging the receipts by date, left to right, earliest to latest, so the eye can follow a gentle road without bends. Buddy shifts and lays a paw on his thigh, the pad warm and just heavy enough, like someone setting a small stone to keep a page from lifting. With his thumb, he strokes the top of that paw in an even circle. At his wrist, the pulse falters for half a beat and then resumes. On the ledger's cover, the kitchen light throws a dull patch. He turns the book slightly so the light won't press down on the numbers column. Such carefulness is an old habit, a kind of inward preparation that needs no words. From a gray fabric envelope, he slides out another transfer receipt. The paper is so thin you can see the reverse print, the payee's name repeating on 2 adjacent days. He stacks the 2 slips, edges flush, and only when they're pressed against the wood does the difference show. One reads received. On the next, the amount is unchanged, but the purpose line adds adjustment surcharge. Surcharge for what? He doesn't write a question mark. He simply draws a thin vertical line in the margin, slender and cold like a wire. At the top left of the page, he adds a fine line of words, verify funding source, before 11 a.m. He underlines before with a single short stroke. The pencil tip skates over the paper with a dry sound, nipping the grain, then stops. He pauses long enough for the pencil's woody smell to thread through the coffee and sets the pencil back in its proper place, its point aimed toward the restaurant column like a needle. Buddy nudges a little closer. A claw clicks softly on the floor, his chin still resting on the man's thigh, dark eyes rimmed with a warm brown ring. That touch loosens the taut wire of his nerves. but beneath it, a small current still shivers. He flips back to earlier pages, rows of steady expenses, purposeful blanks, neat ticks, a few places where spilled coffee has dried into brown halos. There's a rhythm there, a rhythm you can count, can see. Returning to today's page, that rhythm is broken by two new boxes: floral accessories and bridal car. The floral accessories line is filled in by a different hand boulder, slanted, hurried, not his. He neither crosses it out nor circles it. He merely sets beside it the small mark he uses for to be checked, a calm dot. Near the table's edge lies a white bank envelope with an embossed ridge still unopened. He doesn't hurry to tear it. Beside it, an old pair of scissors with blunt tips and a plastic handle gone chalky rests next to a roll of clear tape. He uses the scissors to trim the long edge of an oversized receipt to fit the column, the blades rasping like an old loom, then presses tape along the torn edge so it won't fray. On the page's right margin, he adds a small brass clip, its tip peeking out, bright like a marked musical note. On the wall, the clock runs steadily, the second hand gliding like someone in socks on a carpet. He watches the minute hand step a notch, thinks of before 11 a.m. But the thought doesn't spur him. Doubt is not an alarm trumpet. It is a small root probing into the soil, finding its way, unhurried. He lays his palm on the paper to feel the cool surface of the numbers, then lifts it, leaving a faint bloom of warmth that spreads quickly and fades. Buddy draws a long breath. His nose touches the edge of the band slip and shifts it by a hair. He straightens it and sets an old coin on top to hold it. The coin is dark, its edge is worn. It rolls lightly and comes to rest. He closes the ledger partway, not fully. That half closing lets today's page keep breathing with the kitchen, so if a stray draft passes, it will tremble lightly and call him back. Final movement, he pulls a small slip of paper and writes beneath the line already there: funding source, verify, restaurant/music/flowers. Each word spaced half a pencil width apart, as even as footsteps home. He tucks the reminder into the middle of the page, letting its tabs show like the tongue of a bookmark. Then he leans back into the chair, his hand still on Buddy's paw. In the kitchen, everything has taken its place. Cup in the ring, clip on the page's edge, coin holding the breeze, pencil at rest. All that remains is the sense of a very small sprout, unseen, lying quiet between two layers of paper, enough to make him remember, enough to let him quietly ready himself for a check made right on time. The wind from the lake enters the town like a thin breath, slipping through the rows of waterside trees, making the leaf blades tremble lightly, their tips brushing one another with a papery rustle. The Photoshop sign, hung on a short chain, swings gently, the old wooden face, the raised photo and film letters with cracked paint, giving a soft sound each time the wind shifts, regular as the beat of an outdoor clock. The laundromat next door is ajar. Warmth and the smell of detergent slip out and meet the cold air, becoming a thin ribbon that drifts into the morning mist. At the curb, a bread delivery truck stops exactly at the faded paint line. The driver pushes a metal tray, the golden loaves gleaming in their waxed paper. Far off, the lake catches a touch of early sun, spreading a long streak of light like a knife tip, scoring the water's surface. Inside, a short hallway to the kitchen passes a wall hung with photos. The wooden frames are set slightly askew on purpose, forming a small trapezoid that sits just right to the eye. In the middle is a family photo taken in late autumn. Heavy coats, the tree behind them with more than half its leaves gone. Along the photo's right edge, there is a space, like a missing shoulder, not a miscrop, but the trace of a habit no longer there. Below the picture, a fine band of dust has been half-wiped, revealing a faint rectangular outline where a small frame had once been taken down. The kitchen light slants across, skims the glass, and prints even the little scratch on the frame's lip, like a pencil mark someone once pressed hard and then drew back. The kitchen counter is a bright, oiled plane of wood, shinier where hands often rest. The phone lies face down, the body exhaling a slight buzz. It buzzes again, a low tone like an insect trapped in a box, the screen flashing and then going dark. Final payment, 11 o'clock. The words appear and fade, leaving on the glossy surface the dim trace of a signal already sent. The charging cable touches the phone's edge, the plug's not connected. The white plastic shows a hairline crack nearly invisible unless you tilt your head close. Beside it, a small bowl covers half an apple, the cut line still fresh. A seed has fallen and lies near the rim, round, pale brown. Buddy stands at the window like a gentle sentry. His front paws are set side by side, claws brushing the glass whenever he shifts his weight. His breath fogs a small pool patch on the lower pane, leaving arcs of condensation that form and vanish. Every movement from the street runs into his pricked ears, the signs chain, the crinkle of paper bags, a distant low bus horn. His head tilts when a woman pushes a stroller across the street. It tilts a little more when the mailman drops a large envelope into the mailbox across the way, the lid flipping up and falling with a soft clunk. Out there, the Photoshop opens later than usual. Inside, the blur of a man cleaning a lens, his hand wrapped in a small fiber cloth. On the counter lies a strip of quick prints, each sheet pinned with a tiny clip. In front of the flowers shop opposite, metal buckets stand upright, white chrysanthemums just in. Stems still beaded with water. The wind flips the edge of the sale calendar at the music store at the end of the row, the paper fluttering for a while and then settling. It is all like a town orchestra, each thing contributing a very light note, forming an even backdrop for a morning that seems to hold nothing happening. In the kitchen, the bottom of the coffee cup has left a dry brown ring on the fabric coaster. The expense ledger is half closed, a bright brass clip peeking from its edge. On the chair near the door, his coat hangs neatly, the pocket slightly puffed by the old wallet. The wall clock ticks a notch. The minute hand touches the 10 and goes past, like someone stepping beyond a trail marker. In that rhythm, the phone gives another short buzz, as if reminding him of what has already been reminded. Buddy rises a little, forepaws higher, nose pressed to the glass. Outside, a cream-colored car stops right in front of the photo shop. A man gets out and carefully carries in a long cardboard box labeled frames. When the door opens, the wind chime on the ceiling rings into a string of tones as clear as glass. Buddy watches until the man disappears behind the row of standing frames. Then his eyes shift left, where someone has just gone down the steps to the lakeside, leaving the wooden stairs creaking sparsely. Light gathers on the water and then breaks into moving shards, throwing up onto the kitchen ceiling a band of glitter for a few seconds, just enough to see tiny dust like salt rise in the air. On the wall, the family photo catches the reflection as a slight tilt of brightness right at the space where someone is missing, making that edge shine more than the rest, standing out like a note written in light. From the porch, the newly changed bulb holds steady, no longer flickering. Its gold glow quietly ties this house to the road out front like a taut thread. The coffee maker turns itself off, the small red light going out completely. On the counter, a hand towel is draped over the oven handle, one end hanging down nearly to the floor. Footfalls of a jogger go by, shoelaces slapping against the shoe collars. A steady rhythm coming on, passing, fading. The phone lies still again, the screen cold, but the words "final payment" seem to linger somewhere in the kitchen, like a scent not yet dispersed, drawing his eyes toward the half-closed ledger. Buddy stops bracing, lowers himself, but does not leave the window. He stands like that for a while longer, listening once more to the Photoshop sign, tap its chain very softly before turning his head. His heel pivots on the wooden floor, leaving a faint arc of shed hair glinting in the sun. He walks toward the man, stops beside the chair, and looks as if waiting for a familiar cue. Outside, the town keeps its very even tempo, as if an appointment had been set, but no one had mentioned it yet, and the lake keeps breathing out thin rings of wind, enough to make a wooden sign tremble, enough to stir a thought lying quiet on the kitchen counter. The door opened with a small click. A draft of cold air and a soft perfume flowed across the porch. The daughter came in quickly, like someone stopping only to set something down and leave. Coat open, the edge of her scarf brushing the edge of the table. On her left hand, a new ring caught the kitchen light, a thin silver band cradling a clear stone. When she raised her hand to touch her hair, the sparkle jumped to the ceiling as a small dot and went out. The phone in her coat pocket vibrated briefly, a muffled sound like a stray bee tangled in a scarf. She glanced at it, tapped a finger, then pushed it deeper in. She set the canvas bag down beside the pot of asters, pulled out a tissue to dab a smudge of lipstick at the corner of her mouth. Her fingernail touched the face of the ring, as if testing its security. When his eyes met hers, the look held for only a split second and then slid away, fastening on some spot between the sugar shelf and the sink. The corner of her mouth quivered slightly, the kind of quiver meant to deliver a line already prepared, but instead of becoming sound, it came out on half a breath. He can handle everything. The word everything fell softly, touched nothing, and hid in the little hollow just beneath the clock. He pulled open the lower drawer. The hoarse creak of the hinge was familiar. The binder labeled Home Evidence slid out, its clear plastic cover clouded by years, the paper label inside, written in an even pencil hand. He set the binder on the table, turned it so the spine lay parallel to the wood grain, and with his other hand pulled a chair out for her. She gave a slight shake of the head and stayed standing, a finger turning the ring once, as if counting time. Buddy looked at her, wagged his tail once, then unhurriedly circled down to the legs of his chair and lay close, his chest rising and falling at exactly one beat slower than usual. He opened the binder. Each section was divided by colored tabs: restaurants, flowers, music, photos. Each tab peeked out like little fingers pointing the way. He pulled out a stack of restaurant receipts, arranged them in order of date from left to right, smoothed the edges straight, and secured them with a brass clip. At the bottom, a surcharge receipt faintly printed with special service and an internal code. He laid a pencil along that line, not underlining, just touching it to remember. Beside it were two transfer slips, the words received and adjustment, sitting on the same figure, differing by a justification not yet present. He added a small cream-colored sticky note, wrote neatly, "Reconcile before 11 a.m., then slid it into the edge. She leaned lightly against the counter, her eyes skimming over his fingertips as he squared the papers. He heard her breath catch when she saw the word band sticking out, then a very soft inhale. She squared her shoulders, slid a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture of someone in a hurry to set everything back in order. The ring's glint brushed the edge of the paperclip with a tiny click, just enough for Buddy to lift his eyelids and then close them again. On the stovetop, the light struck the coaster's dry surface, revealing a brown ring no longer damp. He set the cup exactly into that place, a light press to summon the familiar sensation. She opened the cloth bag and took out a catalog sheet printed by the flower shop, white daisies and blush roses listed by bouquet, prices attached after dashes. On the margin of the sheet, there was handwriting, unlike his bold, slanted, hurried adding the line VIP table accessories. She set the sheet on the table, but its corner did not touch the binder. The distance was one finger joint, like a boundary not yet named. He reached out and drew it gently inward to align with the other invoices, then clipped it under the flower tab. She watched the motion, swallowed almost imperceptibly, dipped her head a little, but her eyes still avoided his. The phone on the kitchen counter buzzed 3 beats. A reminder, final payment, 11 o'clock. Both glanced toward the lit screen and then, in unison, looked away as if neither had seen it. He turned to another section of the binder. Photos, a deposit slip from the photo shop on Main Street. The manager's signature sat about a millimeter askew. He added another clear sleeve and slipped in a copy of the confirmation he had printed last night. The thin items stacked together made just enough thickness to make the binder slightly heavy in his hand. That weight reassured him more than any explanations. Buddy stretched his legs, flattened his body onto the wooden floor, and rested his head against his shoe. Its breath wrapped around his ankle, secure as a thin blanket. The tail gave a short thump, when the daughter bent to pick up the tissue that had just fallen. She tightened the bag strap, her finger sliding over a seam that had begun to fray. All the motions were small, but each small thing pinned a bit of meaning into the air. Busyness, a touch of avoidance, and an intent to keep everything neat enough to move on. She reset her collar in the oven's glass, glanced at the family photo on the wall. In the spot where a shoulder should be, the light skimmed past and left a thin, brighter slice. She drew a breath, placed a hand on her chest, then turned away. Before her fingers touched the doorknob, she paused half a second, turned back, and tapped the tip of a finger lightly to his cheek. Not a kiss, just a pinpoint touch, confirming he was there. The ring flashed again. Buddy lifted his head. His tail gave one more gentle thump. The door closed softly. The lock clicked neatly. On the porch, the light stood steady. Inside, the home evidence binder lay open, the colored tabs like breaths arranged in rows. He added another clip at the edge of music, drew a coin from his shirt pocket to keep a surcharge sheet from sliding. The coin striking the dry wood sounded at exactly 1 point. He sat down, set his palm on Buddy's back, and felt the warm rhythm pull his stomach back to level. The phone went quiet again. The clock nudged over to a new tick. Whatever chaos there was now sat contained within plastic clips and orderly notes, and peace was curled beneath his feet, breathing evenly. The glass hall opened like a transparent box set right at the water's edge. From the gravel parking lot, he stepped onto the wooden steps, fine grit clinging to his soles and then falling back behind with each lift of his foot. Inside, the lake light was thrown up onto the ceiling in wavering patterns, moving as if drawing the surface of the water into the architecture. The two thick glass doors with polished steel hinges gave a soft whump each time they were pushed, separating the briny air by the shore from the scent of floor polish and freshly arranged white flowers within. He carried a long cream envelope, the flap sealed tight, the edges slightly rounded from being held too long. In one corner, his pencil mark, a small symbol had been rubbed faint, as if it knew it was meant to be opened by someone else. Near the entrance, the seating chart stood on a wooden easel, the printed names of relatives and friends lined up neatly. On the board, there was a gap the size of a single line, left blank between two surnames, like a waiting place, not yet sure what would be written there. He paused half a beat, his eyes touching that empty space, then moved on. The string ensemble had taken its place at the corner facing the water. 4 gray upholstered chairs, music stands gripping sheets, bows running along forearms, instrument necks set against collarbones. Each time someone went in or out, a breeze from the lake slipped through the door seam and raised a thin tremor on a cello's long note. That vibration sank into the wooden floor, passed under the steps of servers with earpieces, clips tucked into their jacket pockets. A tall vase holding only daisies and baby's breath stood beside the reception. Below it, a cream envelope box with a slot for cards, its linen lid resting ajar like a mouth waiting its turn. He walked the aisle between rows of chairs, the envelope in his hand extended toward the manager's table. The woman, with her hair tied low, was scanning a tablet, and with each swipe, names appeared and vanished like a roll call. On the table lay an open, clear plastic clipboard. Next to it, a bundle of felt-tip pins and a pile of paper clips that shone like fish scales. He lifted the envelope slightly so her gaze could catch it. In that instant, the water behind cast a bright panel onto his body, edging the dark hem of his coat with a seam of light as if stitched in silver. Just as he was a few steps from the table, a figure cut across the path of light. The groom stepped in from the left. New polished black shoes hitting the floor with a sharp sound, tie pulled tight, boutonniere pure white, the petals still holding tiny droplets along the rim. His chest moved quickly with the hurried breath of someone just come from backstage. He stopped precisely on the narrow metal strip inset in the floor that divided inside from outside, where the toe of the man's shoe was touching. His arm lifted very briefly, not making contact, only enough to form a horizontal barrier out of air. The placement was precise, like someone who had practiced many times. There was no spoken sound first, only a breath of cologne mixed with the smell of a new leather watch strap. He held the envelope at chest height, the grip shifting very slightly. A small muscle at the base of the thumb tightened, then released, bringing a blue vein up for an instant. His gaze went past the groom's shoulder to the lake outside, where a water bird had just flown low and skimmed across, scoring a thin, quick line that closed again without leaving foam. At the exact moment the groom's hand lifted sideways, the strings missed a note. The violin caught in the breath. The E string scratched a short streak like a needle scoring glass, and then they all managed to pull together, reflattening the musical ground as if nothing had slipped. A server at the right, walkie-talkie in hand, halted mid-step. The silver tray he carried reflected the two men facing each other. Once, a reversed version, warped slightly at the edge. He stopped exactly where the hinge of light broke in two. The toe of his shoe touched the border of the carpet while the heel still stood on polished wood. His finger joints closed, and the envelope felt a little thinner in his hand. The woman at the manager's table raised her head out of professional reflex, her eyes moving from the envelope to the groom's suspended arm, and back to him. She set down a felt tip pen with a fine tap, like the period at the end of a sentence already written earlier. Light from the lake splashed along his sleeve, the streak running over fabric worn thin at the elbow, like a skipped stitch a tailor had left by accident. In the glass, his reflection and the groom's overlapped, split by the seam of the sliding door. He tilted his head by the smallest degree, a gesture of someone who wants to say, "I know my place," but did not yet manage to set the envelope on the side table. At this very threshold, everything seemed to hold its breath. The daisies did not tremble, the strings held their note, the name board on the easel stayed fixed, and the second hand of a clock hung somewhere high beat once, sounding like a drop of water falling. Outside the glass frame, the lake kept flickering with very even ripples of light. Inside, the boundary was laid down by one arm and one footstep, thin as a strip of freshly drawn air, and in his hand, the envelope of receipts was still warm. No argument. The groom's outstretched arm lowered part way, and a voice flicked out like a thin, cold, low blade, slicing the air right at the threshold. "Today, please don't come in." The last three words fell very slowly, as if balanced on the tip of the tongue before being let slide out. No louder than needed, no excess, just enough to touch the floor and dissolve. He kept the envelope at chest level for one more beat. The skin at the base of his fingers went dry. The paper made a very faint sound, like fiber cloth rubbing against itself in the dark. He did not look at the speaker, nor at the eyes around them that had just lifted. He looked at the side table by the pillar, where a linen cover lay, with its corners crisply folded. He stepped over, set the envelope exactly in the center, and smoothed the edge flat. The face of the envelope lay parallel to the grain, corner aligned to corner, that small exactness like a long-kept habit. The nearest chair was half a finger joint out of line. He corrected it, pushed it one notch so the back clicked flush with the chair beside it. The chair legs skimming the wood made a thin, long sound, just like a hair being smoothed off a forehead. Done, he stepped back. The backward step touched no one, only retraced his own footprint, and then he turned. The scent of white flowers rose from the tall vase by the door, a cold, crisp smell that tightened the throat not from tears but from fragrance. The strings, after the missed note, had recovered their ground beat, but now the bowing sounded as if through a pane of glass, a fraction farther away than when he came in. His footsteps on the floor suddenly lengthened, not because the room was wider, but because each step had to cross a thick patch of silence. The toe of his shoe touched the seams between planks as if crossing little rivers. Under the sole, grit from the parking lot crumbled to powder, leaving a faint chain of marks only tonight's floor cleaner would notice. To the left, the wedding gift envelope box gaped slightly, a white card corner jutting out like a sharp tongue. To the right, the seating chart kept its blank space between the two families. That missing line like a small door just pulled shut. He walked within brightness on all sides, and his path was like a slender wake on water appearing only to seal itself back up. past the glass doors, the hinges' soft whump swallowed the hall's sounds and gave him back the lake wind and the chain of the Photoshop sign swinging. The outside light was flatter than the light within. The water flickered in silver scales. A small rowboat cut across in the distance, the lifted oar leaving a black dot hanging in the eye. He raised a hand to shade part of the glare, blinked from the brightness. Lowering his hand, he noticed it was trembling very slightly, a tremor just enough to make the old wedding ring, worn on his right hand as a habit, kept. Tap lightly against the neighboring knucklebone, a clink no one heard but him. The gravel path back to the lot had no slope, but his knees were heavier than usual. With each step, stones rolled under his soles and slid a little, making a dry sound. At the edge of the lot, a flag pole bore a white ribbon. One thread of it was torn, the frayed end flying like a sentence without a period. In the sky, a thin cloud covered the sun for a single breath and then drifted on. He didn't look at his watch, but the bones at his wrist told him the time by a small surge of blood. His car sat at the end of the row, the body coated with a fine dust. Through the windshield, a dark shape rose and settled. Buddy had been waiting, ears up like two leaves. He opened the door. The lock made a dry, brief click. As soon as the gap was wide enough, Buddy slid half his head out, nose touching the outdoor air, took a breath, then pressed straight into the center of his palm. The nuzzle wasn't forceful, careful, the way he treated an old scrape on the back of a hand, but had enough push to open his fingers. The dog's whiskers brushed his fingerprints with a cool touch. Only then did he realize his hand was cold. He set his palm on Buddy's head, slid over the edge of an ear and down to the neck, where the fur was thickest and warmest. The dog stood still, holding its big body steady in the car doorway like a soft wall. Its breath washed his wrist in short, even streams, filling the hollow the earlier voice had left behind. He bent down, not to hide his face, but to pull the leash clear of the door. Sun-warmed dog, old cloth seats, the scent of papers stowed in the compartment, all of it blended into a smell of home. He rested his forehead very lightly against Buddy's skull for one beat. From the hall came a burst of laughter that cut off quickly, as if someone remembered to keep decorum. The lake wind carried the sound over, shredding it into little pieces that fell onto the gravel at his feet. He shut the car door. The thud drew a clear boundary. Inside, the space pulled in neatly, the steering wheel burnished where hands had gripped it, a folded tissue on the cup holder, a coin rolling slowly in the glove box and then stopping. On the passenger seat, the envelope was no longer there. It lay back on the side table in the hall, square and straight, exactly as he'd placed it. He settled into the driver's seat, not yet putting the key in. Buddy climbed halfway up and set his chin on the man's thigh, brown eyes looking up. There was no question in those eyes, only an acknowledgement. Seen and here. He let his shoulders slacken, shoulder blades brushing the seat with a faint sound. Outside, the wind tipped the white ribbon on the flagpole to one side and then set it straight again. He laid his other hand on Buddy's chest and felt the beat under the thick fur. That beat drew his own heart back toward it. He looked into the rear view. The glass showed the shoreline, a sliver of the glass hull in the distance, and a server pushing a cart. Someone in a dark suit crossed through, a shadow falling for a moment, and then out of frame. He didn't look for a face. He only pressed a fingertip into the rim of the wheel, the nail leaving a short line that faded. His chest eased. A long exhale. Buddy answered with a deeper one of his own. Mouth closed, nose quivering as if scratching an invisible itch. No words were spoken in the parking lot. None were needed. The humiliation had been put in its proper place, left behind the thick glass, along with the bowing that had found its beat again. Here, there was only the gravel lane, the lake, the old car, and a dog resting its head in a man's hand. He turned the key. The engine came up in a low note. Before shifting, he glanced once more toward the hall, not to see anyone, but to mark the position of the side table where the envelope lay. Then he returned to the road, his hand staying on Buddy's head for half a second more, like laying a thin blanket across his own shoulders, before easing the car forward. At noon, the bank counter sat under the cold light of glass, its polished stone-clad edges reflecting neat straight lines. A row of pins on chains, trays of paper slips pressed flat, the money counter occasionally exhaling a dry puff of air, a thin trace of metal and new plastic mixed with the smell of floor cleaner still lingering along the baseboards. He set both hands on the stone surface, the veins beneath his skin like slender rivers passing through a drought. On the other side of the splash guard pane, Margaret hair in a low bun, gray wool cardigan slid toward him, a quarter-folded napkin and a heavy pin. Her gesture was slow and sure, the barrel stopping exactly where his hand could reach without leaning. The bank's logo watermark lay within the paper grain. The napkin's edge touched his palm with a coolness just enough to pull his breathing back into rhythm. Margaret's other hand remained on the calculator, her fingers splayed lightly like a discreet anchor. The hand of the watch on her wrist clicked onto a mark, its shadow sweeping the crystal and leaving a slice of silence in the shape of time. Outside the glass, Buddy waited in the car by the awning, nose pressed to the window gap, now and then printing a faint smudge on the glass that faded. He laid the pen crosswise on the edge of the napkin, tested its weight, then drew it back along with a few folded receipts. No words needed to be said. Among the smooth planes, there were only the soft whistle of the bill checker and the tiny click when Margaret slid the plastic tray toward him, another half a finger's width, a quiet invitation to put everything in its proper place. The town library smelled of old paper and binding glue. The air conditioner hummed low. The curtains sketched leaf shadows across the floor. At the circulation desk, May in a thin, moss-colored jacket, a hair tie showing at her wrist, opened a wooden drawer with the faintest scrape. She took out a clear, glossy sleeve, its corners already rounded, the surface reflecting the book stacks like a small lake. Beside it, a date-time label card, thin rectangular strips pre-ruled, ivory background, lightly rounded corners. At the upper left, a neat little blank the size of a pencil tip, ready to receive each time stamp. May set both items down before him, turned the sleeve a quarter turn so the opening faced his hand for an easy grip. Her finger paused a beat on the stack of labels, as if to settle it in place, then withdrew, leaving no sound of contact. In the next room, the young librarian's barcode scanner beeped now and then, regular as a clock doing work for someone else. On the bulletin board, the children's storytime poster had tipped at a corner in the draft. May smoothed it with the back of her hand as she passed, a familiar gesture like setting a strand of hair to rights. He slid the confirmations he had printed last night into the sleeve and squared the edges. The labels lay beside like a set of milepost stamps, their adhesive faintly fragrant with new plastic. Everything was transparent. Time, the papers, and the way their hands set them on the table. No words wedged in, no need to wink. Buddy, led in on a leash to sit beside the bench near the door, set his chin on the knee of a little girl hugging a picture book of cats and dogs. The girl smiled without sound, tightened her arms at Buddy's neck, then let go. Only the cushions rubbed the floor when he stood, a farewell you could hear with your eyes. By afternoon, the wedding hall was dimmer than in the morning, the outermost glass tinting the water a pale gray. At the auxiliary reception desk, Nora hair neatly pinned high, a clear earpiece at her ear, pushed a clear plastic clip toward him, the metal edge shining a fine line. The clip's corner reflected tiny dust motes in the air, like a rain standing still. Nora's hands wore no jewelry, nails cut short, the knuckles slightly darkened from often pinning and holding boards. She rotated the clip so the opening faced him, its top edge aligned with the lip of the table, a quiet sort of measuring from someone used to setting everything straight. In the distance, the strings changed to a new piece. A bow paused a beat and then slid on. The sound ran over the floor like a thin sheet of water, not reaching as far as where he stood. On the tabletop, the linen lay perfectly flat, the old crease now a line of light dead center where the plastic clip had just been placed. Nora drew her hand back, her palm leaving a brief warm trace on the linen. As she withdrew, the cuff of her uniform brushed the clip's edge with a small tick like a comma. There was no overdone ceremonial smile, only the precision of a witnessing motion. Clip it, set it there, in the right place. He laid the sleeve down, tested the clip's mouth, the spring taking the plastic edge with a firm, quiet bite. Through the glass, a few rings ruffled the surface of the water outside, the evening light gathering into a short silver band. In the corridor, a server pushed a cart past, the glasses chiming into a very fine sequence of sounds, like night rain tapping at a distant tin roof. Buddy did not come in, lay close to the awning, with his head resting on his forepaws, ears twitching at each opening of the door. 3 places, 3 hands, 3 thin objects, a napkin and a pen, a clear sleeve and date-time labels, a transparent clip, no long sentences, no further questions, only gestures settling to the proper pitch, placing just enough weight to keep the papers from flying. Those transparent things gathered in his hands into a straight axis, linking bank, library, and wedding hall, linking the smell of fresh glue to a trace of metal, the bow's tempo to the scanner's beep, so that when he left, everything was light as nothing and firm as a needle that had found true north. Buddy rose as he turned away, gave himself a shake like shedding water, then fell in step. In the distance, the porch light at home would stand steady. Here, the hands had done their part, quiet, precise, and enough. The kitchen was as quiet as a room that listens. The amber light on the ceiling didn't glare, only enough to see the wooden tabletop with its familiar scratches. He drew the home evidence binder closer, flipped to the banking section. The napkin Margaret had given him in the morning lay on top, flat and clean like a blank reserved for words. The heavy pen rested across its edge, the metal barrel cool. He drew a long breath, lifted the pen, and wrote the title in steady block letters, "Withdrawal of Sponsorship." Each stroke pressed into the paper with just the right thickness, neither hurried nor shaky. When the last letter closed, the air in the kitchen seemed to slow by half a beat. Buddy came over without making a sound, the big body gliding past the chair leg, placing one paw on his thigh. The weight was just enough to hold his knee steady. He rested the back of his hand on that paw and felt the pad's softness and warm pulse through the skin. The dog looked up, pupils dark like a deep, rippleless pool, a direct gaze, unattached, like setting a gentle, heavy object down on the part of the heart that had just been touched. In the corner of the kitchen, the clock ticked up one notch. The reminder, final payment, 11 o'clock from the phone lying face down on the counter, still seemed to hang there. But now it was a coordinate, not a spear point. He slid the stack of confirmations into the clear sleeve May had given him and affixed the date-time labels along the edge in order. First label, 10:07, open file. He wrote in pencil so the ink wouldn't bleed, the letters small, even, of equal weight. Second label, 10:12, reconcile deposit. He flipped 2 transfer slips, matched the received stamp against the surcharge adjustment, sketched a thin pencil line down the margin. The pen's tip on paper sounded dry and sure. Third label, 10:18, draft request to cancel authorization. He set the template in the center of the table, corners aligned with the wood grain, as if laying a ruler across a breath. He opened his laptop. The screen came up in a pale blue field, the login box catching his eyes for an instant and then vanishing beneath dots. The account page appeared, rows of small text in straight lines. He navigated to recurring authorizations, list of payees, cadence, toggle switched on. The cursor stopped at the pause/stop box. He didn't click yet. His hand checked his heartbeat, passed over the sternum, then came back. Buddy edged in another half step, chin on his thigh, his breath catching on the trouser nap, the smells of sun and dry grass returning like a safety sign. He clicked. A small prompt popped up asking him to confirm the effective time. He chose effective immediately and added a note. Withdrawal of sponsorship. The cursor blinked once, then stilled. On the screen, the toggle turned from gray to black. He leaned in, drew the napkin back, touched the pen tip, and signed in the requesters section on the form. The signature wasn't pretty, but it was straight, The first letter sank deep into the paper grain. The last drew a thin blade and stopped right at the edge. He clipped the form into the clear plastic clip Nora had placed out in the afternoon, pressed the spring so the mouth took the plastic snugly. A small tick sounded like a comma, placed exactly where it belongs. At the bottom, he tucked in a short letter pre-printed with the mailing addresses. Restaurant banned Photoshop. Not an accusation, just a cold, clear sentence. Sponsorship has been withdrawn. Please pause/adjust invoices. Full stop. The phone vibrated once. He opened the calendar. The 10:30 square was empty. He created an event. Call bank. Confirm stop authorization. Note, record reference number. He set a 10:28 reminder. Added another event, 10:45. Send forms by email plus print 2 copies to file. Each event came with a small checklist box. He ticked the boxes beside 10:07, 10:12, 10:18. The check marks were like small plots of earth just tamped firm enough to plant order. He called. The IVR voice was even. The verification steps passed quickly. When the agent read back the phrase, "Stop recurring authorization," he automatically uncapped the pin and wrote the case number along the label's edge. 1029, number SR4178. The digits held the ink, did not smear. He moved the phone half a handspan away, kept the speaker on so Buddy could share the same structured silence. The other end confirmed the effective time and read each item precisely. Restaurant, music, flowers. He said, "Understood," on a breath sent through his nose, close enough to the mic to carry. When it ended, he hung up and added another label, 10:33, confirmation complete. A deep breath poured into the kitchen, no longer snagging in the middle of his chest. He opened his email and drafted 3 templates. The subject lines were identical, neat and steel cold. Withdrawal of sponsorship, effective immediately. The body was only 3 lines, the signed PDF form attached. He didn't send them yet. He saved as drafts and set a 10:46 reminder. Send. His fingers no longer shook. The small joints clicked less as he typed. On the table, the clear sleeve had thickened, label edges showing in rows like little steps leading toward a place that would no longer wobble. Buddy shifted position, lifted his paw from his thigh and set it back down a little higher, like an accent mark. He stroked from the dog's neck up to the nape, stopping in the groove between the ears where veterinarians say dogs settle when touched. The dog drew in a small, satisfied breath. The tail swept half a circle and stopped. On the porch, the bulb he'd replaced earlier stood steady. Its golden light poured into a long stripe across the kitchen floor. The stripe cut over the binder's edge and fell exactly on the words "Home, Evidence," making the gray pencil letters suddenly as clear as fresh ink. He pushed the chair back a little to take in the whole picture, the signed form in the plastic clip, the sequence of time labels, the events set in the calendar, the deauthorization just recorded by the system. The pain from standing outside the hall door was still there, but it had shifted place, from a sharp knife to a heavy stone lying quiet at the bottom. On the surface, everything was beginning to line up. He laid the pen straight, parallel to the table's edge, and set his other hand on Buddy's chest. At that point of contact, the warm rhythm ran even, pulling his own rhythm onto a level line. He wrote one more small line at the page margin, 10:40, order begins. The words were like a knot tying together all the loose strands of the morning. No victory sound, no soundtrack. Only a kitchen lit just enough, a pin capped and put away, a binder closed tight, and an old dog resting a paw on his owner's thigh. Resolve moving from wound to procedure, from procedure to calm. The rest, he knew, would follow the times already written, and while he waited, he lifted the coffee cup and set it down, fitting the old ring once more. Stopped at the small cafe before the row of halls and got a black coffee. The heat sleeve hugged the cup's body, seam lifting in a thin thread. At the side counter, Nora was busy coordinating. A clear earpiece snug to the rim of her ear, her fingers tapping quickly on the name board. He didn't call out, didn't wave. On the flat linen tabletop, he set down the clear plastic clip Nora had given him the day before. Between its jaws was the signed copy, the line withdrawal of sponsorship straight and clear, the napkin's corner flush with the edge. Beside it, he placed the coffee cup, still warm, nudging it to the rattan coaster so it wouldn't stamp another brown ring. On the cup's rim, he tucked a quarter-folded napkin and in pencil wrote a small line, "For Nora." That was all. Heat from the lid blurred a bright patch on the plastic surface, and the clip gave a little click when he pressed it shut, a sound as if it came from within the linen. He adjusted the placement clip straight, cup not covering the words, then stepped back half a pace. Nora turned just then, her gaze passing over the counter. She gave the slightest nod, the nod of someone grateful but unwilling to break the work rhythm. He answered with a gesture almost invisible, a fingertip touching the clip's edge lightly, like a silent, completed mark. As he turned away, the coffee's warmth still breathed against his back, warm as a hand laid on his shoulder blades. Back home, he rummaged in a drawer for a small oil bottle and a rag. The kitchen door had long made a thin squeak each time it opened or closed. Today he eased the spindle and let fall a single drop of oil. The drop spread like a bead of amber rolling slowly, threading into the metal seam and disappearing. He opened closed once. The squeak stopped. In its place was a short, soft breath. He did the same for the bedroom, the storage room, and the back door, each hinge receiving a warm bead. At the back door, the steps paint had long since flaked. He rubbed it lightly with sandpaper, fine dust falling into small clouds, then smoothed it with his palm. Things that had seemed small suddenly had a voice, light, in place, and not needing anyone to hear. Buddy had lain right at his feet from the start. When he knelt, the dog edged over to make room for his knee. When he stood, it shifted aside, then lay down again, chin resting on the back of his foot as if to keep it from wobbling. Each time he pulled the door to test the sound, its ears twitched and then sank. The tail swept a short circle, curling into a soft comma under the porch light. On the floor, a little shed hair glinted like metal dust. With the back of his hand, he brushed it into a corner, a habit over time, like a thank you. He took a small aluminum ladder and set it against the porch. The old bulb came out with a soft clunk, its base slightly sooted. He set it aside and screwed in the new bulb. The ceramic against the threads rasped for a second and then went smooth. The switch flipped. Amber light came on. No flicker. He stood still, looked at it through a long breath. The gold spilled down the steps, drawing a soft band all the way to the grass's edge. Inside the kitchen, the light slipped through and touched the cover of the home evidence binder on the table, making the thin pencil letters brighten a notch as if freshly retraced. He wiped his hands on the rag, put the tools away, returned the oil bottle to its proper drawer. On the table, his coffee cup was half full, still set snug within the old ring. He sat down and opened-closed the door once more, just to hear the new quiet. Buddy shifted, chest against his ankle, warmth soaking through the trouser cloth like someone placing a hot water bag exactly where it ached. In the window frame, the lake wind moved through the trees. The Photoshop sign trembled very slightly, but inside, everything held its own tempo. Hinges mute, the light steady, the step no longer crying out. He took out a notebook and penciled a short line in the maintenance margin. 1312, oil hinges. 1320, replace porch bulb. The dashes straight, the letters even, not for show, just to know he had set a few small bricks. On the porch, the amber light ran long. Buddy stood and stretched, forelegs reaching out, mouth yawning. A small sound like fibers pulling apart and settling back together. He lay down again in the same spot, his head pillowed against the toe of the man's shoe. The house breathed lightly. Peace, like a thin blanket, spread from the porch into the kitchen, from the kitchen across the pages, then lay still beneath his opening hand. Somewhere in the air, something had shifted, the sadness no longer sharp-edged, order taking its place through small acts, and the coming night looked likely to arrive on softer feet. The phone buzzed once, the bank icon flashed, and then went dark. On the computer screen, the recurring authorization field changed status, stopped. A small reference code appeared in the corner, SR4178. He drew May's date-time label sheet closer and in fine pencil, neat letters marked the beat like footsteps. 1041. Bank confirms stop 1042. Saved code SR4178. He opened the pre-written drafts. Attachment, the signed template, PDF, in a clear sleeve. The subject line held to a single stroke of steel, short and cold. Transfer canceled. The body was only 3 lines. Withdrawal of sponsorship. Effective immediately. Please pause, adjust invoice accordingly. Thank you. No imputations, no heavy words, just procedure. He moved the cursor to the restaurant's to field, checked the name again, then hit send. A thin chime rang out, like a drop of water falling into a sink. 1046. Restaurant email sent. He placed a tiny tick mark. Next was the band. He skimmed the address Nora had confirmed in the plastic clip. The same subject transfer canceled, and the same PDF, the file name differing only by the suffix band.pdf. Send. In the outbox, 2 new sent lines rose to the top, standing side by side like 2 straight columns. 1047. Band email. Sent. Then the photographer. In the corner of the screen, the network status window flickered once. The wind off the porch slipped through the door seam. The curtain tugged lightly as if breathing. He kept his shoulders straight, his palm on Buddy's back. The dog had lain pressed to the chair all this time, feeling the warmth of its chest run even, like a sewing machine that misses no stitch. He pressed send. 1049. Photographer email sent. The 3 emails left his hands and a clean quiet remained. Then the auto-replies returned in their own order. The restaurant first received. We will pause the invoice. The band after acknowledged. The photographer last noted. Each reply carried a different timestamp by the subject, 3 blue dots turning gray, proof that the far side had opened the mail. He did not open them to read in detail. He only copied the edge times onto May's labels, the pencil scraping softly, a dry but gentle sound. 1050. Restaurant confirmed receipt. 1052. Band replied 1055. Photographer noted. He pulled out the printer tray, set 3 confirmation pages with the paper edge flush, and pressed print. The machine whirred like a tame garden bee. The first sheet came out, the margin still warm. In the lower left corner, the line, subject, transfer canceled, was printed in bold, the 3 words as hard as a latch. He touched a fingertip to test the ink's dryness, then stacked the sheets in time order. Nora's plastic clip opened its mouth, the spring clicking exactly 1 notch as it swallowed the 3 white pages. 1057. Print 3 confirmations, clip into file. The phone buzzed again. An email from the bank system. Case closed. Stop recurring successful. His eyes moved over it without opening. His hand was already angling the pencil to label 1058, bank case closed. In the kitchen, the porch light poured in a band more golden than before. Fine dust lifted like salt in the air and then settled. Buddy shifted, setting one paw on his shoe. The small gesture pressed down on an unseen point in his chest. He bent his wrist slightly and wrote one last line for this block of time, the letters even as stitches. 11 o'clock. Final payment has been unplugged. He didn't shut the machine just yet. He created a new folder on the hard drive, NHA-BANGCHUN/wedding/transfer-canceled. The PDF files slid into it like flat panes of glass. Beside the real binder, there was now a digital binder. Both were still and alike in their straightness. On the table, he took out the napkin Margaret had given him and wiped an old brown ring around the coaster not to erase it, only to see the outline more clearly. The cup went back dead center, its base snug to the edge. In the margin of the procedure page, he added 2 words, done. The pencil left the paper, a fine bloom of wood dust on the pad of his finger. He brushed it lightly onto the clip's lid. The dust shone for a second and vanished. Another ding, this time a delivery status notification, delivered from the system. 3 delivered lines stood as a slim column on the right side of the mail list. That column, together with the 3 printouts bearing the subject transfer canceled, formed the morning's frame of justice. No heavy words, no raised voice. Justice lay in the short subject line, in the minute second stamps, in the reference code written in pencil, in the sound of the clip spring touching clear plastic. He closed the laptop. In the house, the freshly oiled hinges were so quiet he could hear Buddy's nails lightly tap the floor. The dog lifted his head, his eyes a calm brightness. He set his hand on the nape, feeling the thick, warm fur like a small blanket. On the porch, the light held steady. Inside, the pages held steady. And in a corner of his heart, a part of the man held steady too, like a stake driven into the right ground, waiting for what needed to arrive, at the times already written down. The water outside the glass frame swept wavering bands of light onto the hall ceiling. That light lay over the white rows of chairs and the long runner like a moving lace. In the corner, the string ensemble was easing the prelude into tempo, bows going like threads stitching a fabric shut, then suddenly paused for a breath's hitch. The violin missed a breath. The cello held a note that trembled, then clamped and went on. That pause was thin as a blade's edge touching the water's surface, rippling up and disappearing, yet enough to make the sharp-eared look up. At a side door, 3 staff formed a small circle, clear earpieces snug to their ears. One held out a tablet, his finger pulled back, a short, bold, cold line of text skimming across the screen. Transfer canceled. Another tucked his chin, tapped the tray of felt-tip pens to steady his hands. They didn't speak aloud. There were only very small nods, a brush of wrists like passing a chord. The groom stepped out from backstage, the white boutonniere still wet with a few drops. His tie was a touch too tight. His index finger searched the wrong button. He tried to hold a ceremonial smile, but the corners ginjihi when the coordinator brought the screen closer. The bold panel on bright ground like a cold seal pressed onto the day's face. He turned half a step. The phone in his hand lit up. A vein rose at his neck. His swipe was so fast, a fine crease appeared along the bridge of his nose. Behind him, because of that turn, the string slipped half a step and then managed to pull the beat back. On the polished floor, his shadow and the coordinator's overlapped, broken by the seams between boards like sentences split across lines. In the middle of the hall, the daughter stood within a ring of white flowers, the dress falling to her ankles, the veil trailing down her back like a thin stream of milk. She held the bouquet in her left hand. Her right snagged at the dress hem. A thumb caught on a strand of lace, neither pulling up nor letting go. Her bodice rose and fell in a short beat. She gazed off toward the water where the silver light was breaking into small pieces drifting on the glass, as if looking long enough would let that light explain what had just shifted places. A bridesmaid beside her held the veil's edge, her eyes skimmed past and anchored at the bride's wrist, pale from clenching. Along the 2 rows of chairs, guests sat straighter than usual. The older ones tilted their heads to ask each other with their eyes. The children were soothed with a soft candy. The wrapper crackled and then went still. Phones lit here and there. One screen opening mail, a bold subject line running across. Another showing the calendar notice, final payment. 11 o'clock just switched status. Another buzzing and then lying still in a vest pocket. From the 4th row, the photographer lifted his camera, sighted through the frame, then set it down and wiped the lens with a microfiber cloth, a gesture clearing the path for a moment that might not come. At the side counter, the hall manager slid a clear clip and fastened it to the file's edge. A thin crease drew across the back of her jacket, like the fold in a letter read and folded again. Next to her, a band member bent low over his phone, his finger slipping down a list of backup pieces, then pocketed it and set the bow to the string as if setting calm back in place. From the kitchen area, a server pushing a cart slowed, hearing something in his earpiece, and then stopping altogether. The glasses on the tray clicked a small chain of sounds, standing in ranks like silent notes. A light breeze threaded through the eave slats, making the white ribbons on the ceremonial post tremble like whispers without a speaker. The wedding cake sat on the display table, sugar petals carved like daisies holding a pale gold. A parent straightened his tie and stifled a cough. A friend of the bride looked down at her toe, her toes shifting inside high heels as if writing something on the floor, the sound of water ticking in the air conditioning duct, the second hand of a clock hung at a corner of the hall, beating steadily. Very small sounds gathered into a taut, thin backdrop everyone could hear. The groom made another round, chin lowered, the tips of his shoes sketching faint half arcs on the floor from dust. He stopped before the strings and said something too small to reach outside ears, but enough to make the violinist nod once, slowly. He turned his palm up to look at his watch. The steel face flashed cold against his brow and left the sensation behind. From afar, the backup flower runner peered in, looked confused, then withdrew. On the seating chart, the blank space between the two families remained, like a patch of silence not yet filled in. The daughter, within the ring of flowers, loosened the thumb caught on lace. The thumb came free, leaving a thin red line on the skin. She shifted her heel half a beat on the white runner, the toe touching down like a borrowed certainty. The bouquet trembled slightly. A daisy petal fell and landed on the shoe's collar, a white dot. She didn't bend to pick it up. The light on the water changed, rose and softened, and within all those very small movements, something quietly took a new name, a ceremony holding still for a beat at the place where people usually step. Phones lowered, eyes lifted, gazes sought one another, binding across the room's corners, and then came to rest on the man in black, trying to hide his trembling hand behind a button. The strings held the beat like a taut line, not letting themselves open even one more gap. No one spoke loudly. No one left a seat. Only the reception screen stayed open, the line transfer canceled, shrinking to a small scrap in the corner, like an invisible pin holding the whole fabric of the rite to its proper fit, enough for everyone to understand, enough that no one would say its name. And, among the white flowers, the bride stood very straight, her hand now off the hem, but still without a place to hold. He was not there. The kitchen kept the morning's warmth, the porch's pale gold pouring along the table's edge. On the wood sat the last confirmation, still warm with ink, bearing the line, "Subject, transfer canceled." He slid it into the clear sleeve. The mouth of the plastic clip parted, the spring swallowed the paper's edge and shut with a small, neat click, tidy as a period. The hour-minute labels stood in a straight column down the margin. 10:50, 10:52, 10:55. He ran his hand lightly along the spine of the home evidence binder, felt the plastic worn to his touch. Then he closed the cover. The binder's hinge gave a low, muffled creak, and everything inside lay still. A long breath slipped out, fogging the window pane into a faint arcing blur that thinned away. On the cloth mat, the brown ring of the coffee cup showed clear. He set the cup in the dead center, the porcelain base snug to the old edge, the touch almost inaudible. A filament of graphite dust still on his knuckle, he brushed it onto the clip's rim. The dust flashed for a second and vanished. A very small flicker of gladness rose from somewhere, the feeling of a latch seating in its groove, and went out. Into the space after that, another image poured, white flowers laid in a circle, a veil falling slow. His daughter's hand caught at the dress hem as if snagged on a thin thread of lace. Her eyes slanting toward the water, standing alone in a room full of people who knew how to keep decorum. He closed his eyes. A quick sting touched the thin skin over his cheekbone. The thrill of vindication drew back into a small pebble in a pocket heavy, but no longer hot. Buddy shifted closer and laid his chin on the man's thigh. The familiar weight pressed his knee down a little, as if to seat him firmer. He lowered a hand, ran it along the bridge of the dog's nose up to the crown, and stopped in the groove between the ears, the warmest place. The dog breathed out a short, even breath. The tail swept a half arc and went still. Its warmth spread slowly, filling in a newly hollowed corner of his chest. He drew the binder to the table's edge and, with a fingertip, darkened the pencil letters, "Home Evidence," by one shade, not to emphasize, but to know his hand was still in the right place. Outside, the porch light stood steady. Its glow slid across the floor in a thin band and touched Buddy's paws, setting the fur at his neck to a shine. The wall clock moved one notch. the second hand's tick small as a drop of water falling in a brass tube. He heard it without lifting his head. He opened a drawer, put the binder away, and pushed until the face of the wood met the cabinet front, the scrape fading at the end. His hand lingered a second on the pull, then let go. He set his other palm on Buddy's chest and felt the beat under the thick fur stir like a shallow wave. Somewhere in the kitchen, the smell of cooled coffee mixed with the scent of freshly oiled hinges into a smell of a thing done. He sat a while longer, silent. On the window's glass, the fog of his breath had cleared. The pane was transparent again, faintly reflecting him and Buddy merged into one dark patch. He thought of his daughter once more, not as someone to be defended, but as someone balancing on new shoes across a glossy floor, and pressed his hand a little heavier on Buddy's head, as if weighting down a paper's corner against the wind. The dog didn't move. Its sharing weighed just enough, with no need for words. The kitchen had no clatter, only silence at the right measure. Justice had been written in short subject lines. The rest, the porch's golden light, already knew how to keep still. He drew a slow breath, held it, and let it go. The ache for his child clung to his chest like a wet cloth, but warmed as it slid through Buddy's fur. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Inside, the cup sat in the old ring, and between them, a man rested his hand on a dog's brow, enough to get through an afternoon. Night touched the eaves with a thin layer of gold. The porch light stood steady, unflickering. Its glow poured down the steps into a soft band, touched the edge of freshly cut grass, and spread over the newly settled beads of dew as if someone had scattered fine salt. Inside, the objects had changed their voices. The refrigerator breathed slowly. The ceiling fan turned on its lowest setting. The kitchen's aged wood stopped shifting after a day when many things had been put wrong and then put back. On the table, the home evidence binder lay open, two label tabs peeking out like bookmark leaves. The confirmations lay flat, edge flush to edge. In the very center, a warm cup sat snug within the familiar brown ring, its heat unfurling into thin coils of steam that wrapped the porcelain rim and vanished into the air. Two chairs were set slightly askew to each other, not facing off but turned toward a space between the place for the old wooden table, the place for the warm cup, the place for the papers that had said their part. Over a chair back lay a thin blanket folded in quarters, its edge spilled a little, like a hand held out but not yet touching. The swept wooden floor showed small streaks of light where the porch glow slipped through the curtain slats. When the kitchen door, hinge-oiled in the afternoon, was opened as a test, it was only a breath, with no trace of the familiar squeak. Buddy lay curled by the table, chin on the tops of his forepaws like a warm stone. Each time the cup's steam drifted down, his eyes opened to a narrow slit and closed again. His tail swept half an arc to tap the chair leg, a soft thoop like a gentle pat on water. The tag on his collar jingled very faintly each time he changed which paw was his pillow. The house, in a way hard to name, had shifted into a posture of receiving, chairs askew, light steady, binder open, warm cup keeping its heat, small things arrayed in the right places like a calm formation. Night wind from the lake looped past the trees, slipped under the eaves, and lifted the corner of an old magazine left on the shelf. The ribbon tied around the pot of asters gave one shake and was still. Far off, a train horn, compressed, passed through the town like a thin graphite line. Nearer, a bicycle wheel went by, its spokes rubbing the night with a small metallic sound. The porch light washed the door frame, bringing out the tiny scratches on the handle like the fingerprints of time. He stood in the dim between kitchen and porch, his back lightly against the cabinet, his hand resting on Buddy's nape, dotting the peaceful picture with a warm pianite that had a pulse. The knock came like a solitary raindrop touching the surface. 3 distinct beats, each spaced just enough for the heart to count. The house answered with a chain of thin silences. The ceiling fan seemed to pause a moment. The steam on the cup changed shape. The binder closed by 0.5 millimeter in the draft. And then everything returned to its place, only Buddy springing up as if a spring had been set in his heart. His nails ticked on the wooden floor to the rhythm he had just learned from his owner's heart, his tail drawing a wider than usual arc that touched the table leg and set the papers trembling by a degree without falling. He shot toward the door, body long and low through the curve, then rose upright before the step, his head tilted left, then right, as if reading a line of tiss through the wood. Jingle the collar tag rang clearer. He wagged with delight, his whole body joining in, as if every hair knew something good had just touched the door. The man followed, walking slowly, his hand brushing the chair back so it slid into its set angle. The warm cup still steamed, a loop of vapor following him to the threshold and breaking apart before the handle. The porch light cast his and Buddy's shadows down the steps into two long shapes, overlapping for a stretch and then parting. The leash stirred lightly like a hyphen. Inside, the binder stayed open, the label tabs showing like a courteous invitation to the truth, should it need to stop by and say a little more. Outside, the night held still, asking nothing, keeping just enough quiet for the heart in a chest to hear itself. He set his hand on the knob and felt the cool metal meet skin still warm from the teacup. Buddy rose onto his toes, nose drawing a deep breath, his breath tracing a misted streak on the wood. Everything was ready in an open posture. Two chairs slightly askew, waiting to be drawn closer, the warm cup waiting for a trembling hand, the binder waiting for a soft click, and a dog's head wagging, waiting to meet someone's palm. The knock still carried an after resonance somewhere between porch and heart, inviting him to turn the knob just a little, the rest already prepared by the house. The light steady, not blinking. The door opened very softly, like an envelope gently slid out of a clip. The daughter stood on the step, makeup blurred into two thin streaks beneath her eyes. Hands empty. No bouquet, no purse, no phone. Behind her, the porch light cast a thin rim of brightness along the edge of her ear, making visible a strand of hair stuck to damp skin. She didn't step in right away. Her shoes were lightly dusted from the hall's courtyard, the toes angled inward like a request for permission that hadn't become a sentence. Buddy bounded forward, then suddenly slowed halfway, as if remembering to be gentle. He wagged his tail in a wide arc, his whole body joining, lowered himself, drew a quick breath at her wrist, and then turned to touch the man's palm, pulling the two of them into the same rhythm of breathing. The tag on his collar jingled a small note. It fell onto the wooden step like a warm comma. She bent to touch his head, an uncertain touch, the palm of her hand leaving a faint mark on the black fur along the center of his brow. He stepped back inside and slid the left-hand chair out just 1 footstep's width. The second chair was already set at an angle. He turned it a degree more so both seats faced the space between them, where the old table held a warm cup still steaming. The vapor curled up, erased the smudge of makeup for an instant, then gave it back. The home evidence binder lay open, the mouth of the clear plastic clip Nora had given him ajar, like a gentle, quiet mouth. The time-minute labels still peeped out, the pencil lines even and snug. He didn't touch them. The papers were already in the posture to say their part, needing no hand to lift them. She crossed the threshold, her foot touched the wooden floor with a tiny hollow sound, and sat in the chair he had pulled out. The wedding dress was gone. Only a thin evening coat remained, and her hands laid one over the other on her lap, the index nail rubbing the middle knuckle as if to put away a thought. Buddy lay down between them, his back covering part of the space, his chin on the top of her foot, his tail tapping the floor in short beats. Each beat was like a steady knock, telling that the house was still breathing. He poured more hot water into the cup. Warmth spread, drawing a new ring of steam. He slid the cup to the table's edge within easy reach before her, then withdrew his hand, his palm waiting on Buddy's nape. She didn't pick it up at once, she simply leaned in, brought her breath to the porcelain rim, eyes closing by half. On the tabletop lay a quarter-folded napkin beside it, the corner slightly wrinkled where it had been creased, the one taken from the bank counter that morning. Lying there like an invitation to dry off with no insistence. Outside, lake wind moved across the porch. The curtain quivered half a beat and settled. The porch light stood steady, unflickering, its beam tying doorframe and step into a single strip of light. In the kitchen, the refrigerator breathed very low. The ceiling fan drew a fine line across the ceiling. The room held a quiet just deep enough to hear the ink drying on the last confirmation, to hear the flecks of wood dust when the tip of his pencil brushed the notebook margin to make a period that needed no word. She opened both hands and laid them palms down on the table, a bare, gentle gesture. On the backs of her hands, fine veins stood out from the cold. The smudged makeup at the eye's corner had dried into a gray streak. Buddy inhaled deeply and tucked his head into the space between her wrists, pushing her arms apart by half a joint. She let him do it, her fingers unconsciously drawing a small circle on his skull loop, closing and opening to the pace of his breath. He watched the motion and felt the thin joint between the two of them, cast of dog's fur, warmth and silence setting into a latch. No one spoke of the wedding hall, the strings, or the screen with the bolded line. Here the papers had spoken the paper's share. They lay in the clip in straight ranks, their voice the timestamps and the short subject lines. Here silence kept silence's share. It stood between the two chairs, at the cup's rim, in Buddy's tail, lightly touching the floor, in his very small nod when she set a hand to the cup's handle. The necessary things were shifting into place on their own, moved by an unseen force. He stood, went to the refrigerator, and unpinned a small magnet to straighten the slip of paper still attached there. The paper was old, edges slightly curled, neat pencil writing from many days ago. The porch light, through the door frame, washed a patch of brightness across its surface, making the letters darker without any retracing. He touched a fingertip to the lower edge and pressed it flat. She looked up, her eyes stopped trembling. On the paper, the line was still intact. Let the truth be in its proper place. The rest, time. Thank you to everyone for listening to the story. In the end, revenge here isn't the bang of a fist on the table, but the way a grown person cuts the power to chaos, turning off pointless authorizations, letting the papers speak the paper's share, pulling out a chair for the one they love to sit, and letting the dog lie between them like a warm bridge. The night closes with the porch light steady, a warm cup still steaming, the binder shut tight. The bitterness quiets, leaving only Buddy's even breath and a span of silence wide enough for sorrow to be set down in its proper place. If you've ever chosen to let evidence speak in place of anger, what did you reset first? A porch light, an hour-minute marker, or some small thing someone thought no one would remember? Leave a single detail below in the comments, a scent, a sound, an object. No need to tell it all, just a marker so those who pass by can recognize one another. And if you had to write one line for the note on your own fridge, what would it be? Here, ours is still there. Let the truth be in its proper place. The rest, time,